Welcome to The Explainer. I am so incredibly excited you're here today because we're about to dive into a massive, kind of hidden barrier in the electric vehicle transition. We talk all the time about range anxiety, battery materials, new car prices, the usual stuff. But there is this silent roadblock keeping millions of people from making the switch to an EV, and it literally has everything to do with where you live. Okay, let's get into it.
All right, picture this for a second. You rent an apartment in a big building. Every single day, you commute 30 minutes to work in your gas car because, well, there's just no reliable public transit for your route. Gas prices are creeping up, draining your wallet, and you really want an EV to save some cash and cut down your carbon footprint. Plus, there are some amazing tax credits out there right now. But here's the massive roadblock. Your apartment building? Zero on-site EV chargers. Your workplace doesn't have them either, and the absolute nearest public charger is a full 3 miles away from your house. To charge up for your daily commute, you'd basically have to go sit at that station for hours. So despite genuinely wanting an EV, you're pretty much forced to stick with your gas car.
Now, if that scenario sounds frustrating, consider this. It is not just an isolated, hypothetical problem. Nearly 1/3 of all households in the United States live in multifamily housing, meaning buildings with 2 or more units. We are talking about tens of millions of people who potentially face this exact same barrier. They are ready for the EV revolution, but the infrastructure simply isn't ready for them.
So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll look at the booming EV market. Then we'll uncover the realities of the multifamily charging gap, see how U.S. cities measure up, and finally, look at some policies to plug everyone in.
Okay, part 1. The booming EV market.
Because on the surface, things look incredible. I mean, just look at this curve. Cumulative battery electric vehicle sales in the US have completely rocketed past 4 million. We actually hit a major tipping point recently too, where new EV sales captured over 9% of all new light-duty vehicle sales in 2023. And between August 2023 and July 2024, the US averaged nearly 100,000 EV sales a month. That is a 20% jump from the prior 12 months. So the demand? It's absolutely there.
And to support all those new cars, the infrastructure is trying to keep up. We've now got over 157,000 public Level 2 chargers and almost 50,000 Level 3 chargers installed coast to coast, which is a huge effort. But, context is everything. Compare those roughly 200,000 ports to the sheer scale of the gas station network. There are currently between 435,000 and 1.74 million gas pumps in the U.S. today. I mean, to be fair, we've been building gas stations for a century, and we've been building EV chargers for barely a decade.
Which brings us to part 2, the multifamily charging gap. Because that explosive growth hides a massive blind spot. Before we get into the gap itself, let's real quick break down the tech. Level 1 charging is basically your standard household outlet. It's a 120-volt connection, gives you about 3 to 7 miles of range per hour. Super slow, but steady. If you have a dedicated driveway, you plug in overnight, and boom, you wake up with enough range for the day.
Then you step it up to level 2. This uses a 240-volt service, so think of the outlet you'd plug a heavy-duty electric clothes dryer into. It delivers a much faster 14 to 35 miles of range per hour. This is pretty much the gold standard for residential buildings and workplaces. But here's the catch for apartment buildings. Installing level 2 usually requires some pretty major electrical upgrades to the property.
And finally, Level 3, also known as DC fast chargers. These push out massive amounts of power, up to 350 kilowatts, meaning you can fully charge a battery in a matter of minutes. So here's the crucial takeaway. If you live in an apartment without access to that slow, steady, overnight charging from a Level 1 or 2, you are heavily relying on finding a fast, reliable Level 3 public charger nearby just to make owning an EV work.
And right now, that heavy reliance on public infrastructure is creating a stark equity divide. Data from the Union of Concerned Scientists shows that Black, Latino, and Asian drivers have the exact same interest in owning EVs as white drivers. But equitable access? It's a critical barrier. Why? Because right now, 84 to 94% of EV drivers who live in single-family homes have access to home charging. But for folks living in apartments, less than half of them have that kind of access.
The real-world mechanics of this are fascinating. We know roughly 64% of U.S. renters live in multifamily housing, like townhomes and big apartment complexes. Often, the landlords face what's called a split incentive. It's a classic catch-22. The renter gets all the benefits of the charger, but the landlord is the one who has to foot the bill for the expensive electrical upgrade. As a result, millions of people are just structurally locked out of convenient on-site charging.
Moving on to part 3, how cities measure up.
So how does this actually play out across the country? A recent report analyzed 69 different U.S. cities to see how they rank. And they used a very specific ratio, the number of multifamily housing units compared to the number of public EV chargers. The researchers determined that a true best-in-class optimal rating would be 25 or fewer multifamily housing units per public charger. That means low competition, high reliability. But, spoiler alert, not a single city in the United States achieved that best-in-class rating. Every single one has work to do. Let's look at the leaderboard. West Coast cities absolutely dominate the top 5. Places like San Jose, Sacramento, and Las Vegas are actually doing comparatively well. Meanwhile, Florida is a total paradox. The state has some of the best-ranked cities, like Orlando, but also some of the absolute worst, like St. Petersburg and Cape Coral. Just to really hammer home how massive this disparity is right now, check out this comparison. San Jose ranks #1 in the country. They have 41 multifamily housing units competing for every one public EV charger. But if you live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which ranks dead last at number 69, you and 829 other multifamily units are fighting over a single public charger. 830 to 1. That is a mind-blowing contrast and a huge barrier to adoption.
Now, you might be thinking, well, obviously, bigger cities just naturally have worse ratios because they're huge, right? Actually, scratch that. The data proves that theory completely wrong. When we map out city size versus charging access, the dots are all over the place. Housing stock and city size simply do not correlate with charging access. New York and Chicago struggle, sure, but so do much smaller cities. What this tells us is that local policies and local priorities are playing the biggest role here, not just population size.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 4, Policies to Plug In. Because while this gap is severe, it is an entirely solvable problem. Local and state governments have immediate opportunities to expand reliable public charging right now. Take this brilliantly simple solution, a curbside charger. By integrating chargers into streetlights or putting them right along residential sidewalks, cities can essentially create home charging for folks who only have street parking. Seattle, for instance, just rolled out 25 curbside Level 2 stations to do exactly this.
But to really fix this at scale, we need actionable policy. First, cities have got to adopt EV-ready building codes for new construction. Places like San Jose and Denver already require new apartment developments to be pre-wired for EVs, which saves an absolute fortune compared to tearing up the pavement to retrofit later. Second, we have to incentivize upgrades for older, existing buildings. States like Massachusetts are currently covering up to 60% of installation costs for landlords. Third, cities need to aggressively go after federal funding, like the DOT's community charging grants. And finally, you have to engage the community. Ask the renters where these chargers actually need to go.
Look, the transition to clean, electric transportation is moving fast, but it's only going to fully succeed if everyone is invited along for the ride. We've seen the data, we know the disparity is real, and we have the policy solutions right in front of us. So I want to leave you with this question to chew on the next time you're walking around your own neighborhood. Is your city ready to plug everyone in? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.